for this meeting of the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum held on the 24th of August 2023. I have apologies for Councillor Buchanan, but I can see that Councillor Handybode has joined remotely as a substitute. Councillor Dewar, I can see that you're also present, as is Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Gowland? No. I can see that Councillor Keat is present. Councillor Lockhart? No. Also present today is Councillor Mars, and I have apologies for Councillors McAdams and Nugent. We also have a number of officers present today, and with that, I'll pass you back to the Chair for today's business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Elizabeth Ann. If we go to item number 1, which is the declarations of interest, and are there any? Okay, there's no declarations of interest. If we can move on to item number 2, and that's the minutes of previous meeting, pages 3 to 6. Can we agree those minutes? Thank you, Julia. Moving on to item number 3, and that's the Capital Budget Monitoring 2022 to 2023, the General Fund Capital Programme, and that's pages 7 to 14. And if I can ask Jackie Taylor and Derek Craig to run through the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just point out before I start, this is quite a hefty agenda pack this time round. This is because we're dealing with closing off the old financial year and also bringing in the first monitoring period of the new financial year. So firstly, at item number 3, we are dealing with an old year report, and this is around our capital budget monitoring for our general fund programme. At section 4, we're covering that the general fund capital programme totalled £78.4 million last year, and the total spend that was achieved at the end of last financial year was £65.7 million. So that was an underspend of £12.6 million. And you can see there at section 4.2 where that underspend relates to in terms of resources. The main reason for the underspend is just timing of spend across financial years. The main projects that are responsible for the overall programme underspend is detailed in Appendix B for your information, and that includes a list of the projects that are continuing into the new financial year along with their completion dates. At section 4.4, there's a reference there to some year-end accounting adjustments that we require to make, which just puts the spend in the right place for us in terms of our accounts. And we're seeing there at section 4.6 a reference to carry forward. This is us carrying forward the unspent monies from last year, and we'll carry that into the new financial year, and you'll hear reference to that later on in the agenda pack. If I take you to the appendices, Appendix A on page 10 shows the spend against each resource and service for the year. And as always, the right-hand column shows our actual spend on those services. Continued on to page 11, you can see the detail of the income that funded the capital programme for the year, and that totals £62.9 million. And then as I referred to earlier, Appendix B, which appears on page 12, shows the projects that are carrying forward into the new financial year and their expected completion dates. I scroll through, that is the end of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any questions with that report? No questions? Okay, thank you. Can we agree the report? Thank you very much, Julia. Moving on to item number 4, and that's the capital budget monitoring 2022-2023 housing capital programme on pages 15 to 18. And if we can hand you back to Jackie and Derry, please.
Thanks again, Chair. So we're still in the old financial year closing off capital, and this is now about our housing capital programme. Again, section 4 is where we summarise the position for the year. We had a budget of £66.4 million for the year and actual expenditure of just under £61 million. So that's £5.6 million less than the budget that we had set. due to a number of factors, and they're covered there at section 4.2 for you, and we've reported these previously in the year. So it's predominantly due to property services operatives being diverted to tackle the impact of the bad weather in December, and also some delays in relation to milestone payments for properties in Straven. In addition, environmental surveys on external fabric projects required to be paused due to the suspected presence of bats. At section 4.4 on page 16, we report that there was additional one-off income that also came in the year, and that requires to be taken into account going forward. So in total, for the year, we will carry forward just over £8 million into future years' capital programmes. If I take you to the appendices, Appendix A on page 17 shows the income that funds the capital programme. And then on page 18, we have the visual presentation in a graph form of how we spent our money over the year, taking into account what our original plans were and what we actually achieved in year. Again, Chair, happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, no questions. Can we agree the report? Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 5, and that's the Capital Budget Monitoring 23-24, General Fund Capital Programme, pages 19 to 40. And hand over to Jackie again.
Thank you, Chair. So now we're back into the current financial year, still on capital, and this is our General Fund Programme for the current financial year, 23-24. And this report covers the period to the 14th of July, so still very early on in the year. At section 3.1, we report that the Council approved a general services base budget of just over £91 million for the year. At section 4.1, we report that a number of adjustments to the programme have been required to reflect the budget carried forward from last year, which I mentioned in the previous reports, along with additional funding that we received in year. We've also made an adjustment to reflect the anticipated spend that can realistically be achieved in this financial year. There's no point in us building in budget if we can't actually achieve spend on those. So in total, those adjustments amount to a net decrease of £13.2 million and has resulted in a base budget going forward of £77.8 million for the year. A full list of the adjustments is included in Appendix A. So in the normal manner, we've taken that base budget, and Executive Committee have been asked to approve a couple of in-year adjustments through the exception process that takes place. And those adjustments have totalled a net increase of £5.4 million. They were approved at Executive Committee on the 21st of June and also on the 16th of August. And they're detailed in the appendices as well, and we'll cover those in a second. So that takes our revised funding available and the programme for this year of £83.3 million for capital. Section 4.4 of the report shows that we have spent to the 14th of July £9.8 million, which is only very slightly behind where we expect to be at this point in time. If I take you to the appendices, firstly on Appendix A on page 22, this is the list of the adjustments that were made to that base programme that I mentioned earlier. And you can see there in a table on page 23, a summary of how we have arrived at that base budget position that I mentioned a second ago. Moving on to page 24, Appendix B shows where the projects that we've identified will not spend in 23-24, but we have slipped them into future years. They're detailed there with their value as well for information. When I move on to Appendix C on page 25, these are the adjustments to the programme that Executive Committee have approved for your information. They mainly reflect additional funding coming in for projects, and you can see there if I run through them on page 25. We have funding from the Place-Based Investment Programme from the Scottish Government. We have monies from Strathclyde Partnership for Transport, £1.8 million. We have funding around cycling, walking and safer routes. And we also have at the bottom of page 25 some funding to augment the project at Jackton Primary School from developers' contributions. Over the page on page 26, we have a couple of projects around education which revolve around additional support needs and capital costs associated with those, and they're detailed at the top of the page. And then we have some adjustments to a project at Bigger Corn Exchange that's funded from the Council's Prioritised Urgent Investment Fund, and also some external funding as detailed in that exception. Moving on to page 27, there are more exceptions that were approved at the most recent Executive Committee. Again, picking up some external funding from Transport Scotland for electric vehicle expansion. We have some funding brought in for memorial headstone inspection and remedial works. This is an adjustment within our capital programme, moving monies from cemeteries allocations. We've got funding that's come in from the Nature Restoration Fund at £545,000, and we have funding that's come in from the government on road safety improvements. At the bottom of that page, we have a project around Stonelaw High School adaptations, and this is to accommodate increased pupil numbers, and that's funded from developer contributions. Over the page on page 28, we have a final adjustment around, again, government grant that's come in for Inspiring School-Aged Childcare Spaces programmes, and you can see the projects detailed in that exception there. Moving on to page 29, we have another appendix, and this shows the summary of each resource's budget for capital for the year, in that right-hand column, totalling the £83.3 million. The next page on page 30, we have that broken down in a little bit more detail, covering services. And again, we're showing on that right-hand column the actual spend that's been achieved to the end of period 4, which is the 14th of July. And then the third page of Appendix C, which is on page 31, shows the funding that we're expecting for the year and the actual amounts that we've received. As always, we focus on the big items here, which is around our borrowing requirements and around capital grant from the Scottish Government, which you can see in that table. On page 32, we start our physical progress reports on the capital programme, and I'll hand over to Derek to give an update on those. Thanks.
I'm pleased to say at period 4, that's to the 14th of July. There are no projects showing behind programme at that time. Over the page, on to page 33, the non-build executive summary. Partway down the page, it also shows that there are no projects behind programme, so everything's going quite well until up to the period 4 date of the 14th of July. And page 34 is a list of all the projects in the non-build side, and we move to Appendix H, which is on page 35, and that is the roads executive summary. And also to report there to committee that at period 4, the 14th of July, there are no projects behind programme there either. And that's the report, Chair.
Thank you very much to both of you. Has anybody got any questions?
I don't see any hands, Chair.
No, thank you very much. Can we agree with the report?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 6, and that's the Capital Budget Monitoring 2023 to 24 Housing Capital Programme, pages 41 to 46. And I'll hand back over to Jackie and Derek, please.
Thank you, Chair. So still on capital and still on the current financial year. Again, this report takes us to the 14th of July. So again, if I focus on section 4 of the report, for the housing programme, we have a base capital programme of £63.9 million for housing. It mentions at 4.2 the carry forward figure that I mentioned earlier on of just over £8 million that we were carrying forward into future years. So only 3.9 of that is required in this current year, and the remainder is being carried forward to future years. In addition to this base position, the Executive Committee on the 16th of August agreed that we would increase the capital budget by £1.6 million, and that reflects the expenditure on new build homes at East Whittleburn, which are being built on behalf of West Whittleburn Housing Association. So as a result of those things, we have a revised programme of £69.6 million. And as at the 14th of July, we show at section 4.5 that we have spent just under £12.5 million. If I go to the appendices, on page 43, we have Appendix A, which shows the funding for the Housing Capital Programme and the actual amount that we've achieved in year. And then on page 44, we have the physical progress update. And again, Derek will take us through this. Thanks.
'44, as Jackie said, we have to the period ending the 14th of July, we actually have 4 projects behind programme. And over the page, on page 45, there's a list of 4 projects there, which I'll take you through. Glebe Court in Lanark, the replacement and communal boilers and heatings we're behind programme there as a result of a number of delays during the tender process. The next one is Headhouse Court Sheltered Housing Complex. That project has been behind programme due to delays with another project, which is the next one down at Devar Sheltered Housing Complex. That's behind because of a result of delay on-site delivery and for doors. So that's had an impact on 2 projects, that delay. Wingate Park Sheltered Housing is the last one of the 4. And this is behind because I've had some difficulties resourcing that project at the tender stage. That's all, Chair.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Jackie. Has anybody got any questions? No questions? Can we agree the report? Thank you, Julia. Okay, moving on to item number 7. That's the revenue budget year-end 2022 to 2023, pages 47 to 60. And if I can hand over to Jackie again, please.
Thank you, Chair. So now we're moving on into our revenue budget reports. The first one being closing off the old financial year. Now, this report was taken through Executive Committee in June, so it is quite an aged report by this point of reporting it to the forum. So what I'll do is pick out the kind of main highlights of the year-end position last year for your information. Section 4 is probably where I would draw your attention firstly. At section 4.2, we reported that we had an underspend of just under £4 million, and that was after a proposed transfer to reserves, and we'll cover those in a second. Now, that's in addition to the position that we reported as part of what we call the probable outturn exercise, that members should remember that we've reported to this forum before. So the year-end position was a further £3.966 million of an underspend. And the table 1 at section 4.2 shows the movement between the probable outturn and the year-end position to show what had moved from that original position. The main movement you can see is under corporate items, and that was a movement of £3.3 million. And if I draw your attention in the report to section 4.8, which is on page 49, you can see the reasons for that movement. Predominantly, it reflects the impact of the Teachers' Industrial Action, where we achieved an underspend because of that, and also an element of the pay award budget that we had that didn't have to be required to the IGB in-year budget. I mentioned transfers to reserves earlier. Members will appreciate that as part of our monitoring and agreement at committee. Some money is transferred to reserves to meet payments that are due after this financial year. And as part of this paper that went to Executive Committee, there was further approval to transfer money to reserves. The additional transfers to reserve totalled £8.3 million, and they're detailed for you at Appendix 4. You can actually see each of those individual areas. And when we run through the appendices, I'll highlight them to you. I would point out to forum at section 5, there is reference to the home carers job evaluation. What this element of the report was pointing out was, as an outcome of the job evaluation for home carers, there will be recurring costs that will require to be picked up by the Care at Home service, which is delegated to the Integrated Joint Board. That's approximately £7 million. That isn't in the IJB's budget for 2023-24. However, they are considering a budget recovery plan that will be reported to the IJB in September on how they plan to meet those costs. There's also reference at section 5.5 to backdated pay. So an update to what's been reported within this report, there is a backdated element of the job evaluation process, and that will require to be made in the old financial year, so financial year 22-23. So whilst the payment hasn't been made yet, we do have to account for it in the old financial year, and that will require us to adjust our year-end accounts for that transaction. There is reference at section 5.6 to an element of what had been agreed before around funding for children and families pressures that we were going to achieve by clawing back some underspend from the IGB last year. Because of this requirement to pay the home carers back pay, there will no longer be an underspend in the IGB, and therefore the funding that was identified to help with children and families pressures will no longer be available. Therefore, the underspend that I mentioned earlier for the council, that £3.966 million, has been agreed that will contribute towards the children and families pressures going forward. The funding package in relation to the back pay for job evaluation was reported to Executive Committee in August. Section 6 of the report picks up the housing revenue account position for the old financial year, and it's a break-even position that was reported. That was after some money that was transferred from the HRA reserve, which was slightly higher than had been budgeted. In terms of the appendices, on page 53, we've got Appendix 1, which shows a very detailed table which shows each of the services for the council and their budget and spend for the year. A very similar position has been reported to previous forums on each of the individual service areas. On page 54, on Appendix 2, there is more information around the year-end position across resources and across corporate spending lines for your information. And then on Appendices 3 and 4, this is where you can see the details of all the transfers to reserves that have been agreed by the Executive Committee. Some of these you will have seen before, as we've been reporting these to the forum as the probable outturn exercise was concluded. And on page 59, Appendix 5 summarises the position for the housing revenue account for the year. And in the usual format, you can see each of the budget categories on the left-hand side and the spend in the right-hand columns. And that, Chair, I would conclude on, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got any questions?
Not seeing any hands, Chair.
No questions? Okay, thank you. Can we agree that report, please? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 8. That's a revenue budget monitoring 2022 to 2023, the detailed resource analysis on pages 61 to 138. And if we can hand over to Lorraine O'Hagan, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, Forum. As the Chair explained, the 2022-23 detailed resource analysis is highlighted on pages 61 and 62, and the substantive detail across all of the resources starts on page 63. Just with the report that Jackie has just gone through, this is aged information relating back to the position at the end of March 2023. And there is quite a lot of detail across each of the resources in terms of the variance explanations, but they are all a variation on what we have been seeing throughout the year. There isn't a lot of new variances to highlight to members. So if the Chair agrees, I'd be looking to see if there's any particular questions that members would like me to take them through. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Okay, no questions. Can we agree that report? Thank you, Julia. Moving on to item number 9. That's a revenue budget year-end 2023 to 2024, pages 139 to 144. I can hand over to Jackie, sorry, not Lorraine, Jackie. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. So this is still on our revenue budget, and this is into the new financial year now. So this is the first report that we brought to Forum on our new financial year, and this takes us to the 14th of July in a similar way that the capital report did earlier. So a much simpler report to run through. We are very early in the financial year and we are reporting a break-even position at the moment. We do have two specific references to services within social work that I would draw to your attention. Firstly, at section 4.2, we are referring to children and families. This is a theme where we have reported on often, and it does highlight the fact that we have significant financial pressures within children and family services, and these are continuing into 23-24 in relation to residential placements, fostering and kinship care, some of which is a legacy from the pandemic. We do have one-off funding that is part of our budget this year, totalling £9.2 million, and that is helping balance our budget for children and family pressures this year. That funding won't be available into 2024-25. We are assuming that the funding will be drawn down this year, and that's why we show a balanced position. But the service is working towards managing their overall budget pressures in 24-25 next financial year. On adults and older people, as covered at section 4.5, we make reference there again to the outcome of the job evaluation exercise that I mentioned as part of the last report. So as I mentioned before, we have £7 million of recurring costs, £7 million of additional recurring costs as a result of the job evaluation process, and they haven't been budgeted within the IGB budget that was set for this year. As at the 14th of July, costs of £1.9 million have been incurred in relation to the increased cost of grade changes, and they've been incurred, as I mentioned earlier, through the IGB budget. So as a consequence of the reporting requirements for the integrated authorities, these costs also appear in the figures that we report. We're not showing an overspend at this point in time, as there is sufficient budget available at this stage to cover the cost to date. But as I reported earlier, the IGB are looking to identify solutions, and they are looking to take a budget recovery plan to their IGB on the 19th of September. In relation to the housing revenue account position, to this point in the year, we are showing a break-even position as well. If I take you to the appendices, on page 142, we have Appendix 1, which again shows a detailed position on each of the departments of the council and their budget and spend position as at the 14th of July. And on page 143, we have a very similar report, but this time it breaks it down over expenditure type across the council. So, for example, employee costs, property costs, transport costs. On page 144, on Appendix 2, we have the presentation of the housing revenue account at this point in time. Again, you can see that we are showing a break-even position at this point in time. That's the report, Chair, and again, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm not seeing any hands.
No questions. Thank you. Can we agree the report? Thank you, Julia. Okay, moving on to item number 10, and that's revenue budget monitoring 2023-2024, detailed resource analysis, pages 145 to 184. And if I can hand over to Lorraine, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the summary report, or the covering report rather, is on page 145 and 146, but the detailed resources commence on page 147 with community and enterprise resources. So this follows on from the report that Jackie provided a few minutes ago, and for community and enterprise resources shows a break-even position at the 14th of July, and that's summarised on page 147. The detailed variance explanations are then on page 148 through to 150, and I'm happy to take any questions if members have anything to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Are there any questions?
Not seeing any hands, Chair.
Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe go on to the next part, Lorraine.
Okay, education resources is then shown on page 155. Again, you have the greyed out box there which shows the budget for the year for the resource, and the position at the 14th of July, which is accounting period 4, is on the right hand side. And again, for education at this point, we're showing a break-even position. The variance explanations then are shown on page 156 for education, with the trends behind that starting on page 157. And again, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, no questions. Yeah, we can move on. Thank you.
The next resource then is Finance and Corporate Resources, and if I can find the page 161. So again, at accounting period 4, we can see the budget for the year in the greyed out box, and we can see the position at the 14th of July on the right-hand side. And again, while we have some variances across the services, we're showing a break-even position across the resource as a whole. The variance explanations start on page 162 and run on to page 163. And again, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Are there any questions? There are no questions. Okay, if you can take us through the next section, please.
Housing and Technical Resources then is on page 167 with the budget for the year of 14.176 million and no variance as at accounting period 4, which is the 14th of July. Again, the variance explanations are shown from page 168 onwards. And if members have any questions, I'm happy to pick them up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It doesn't look like there are any questions, are there? Nope, no questions. And if we can move on to the next part, please.
Page 173 then shows a summary in a little bit more detail of the housing revenue account at accounting period 4. And again, if members have any questions on those variances, I'm happy to pick them up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Doesn't seem to be. Okay. If we go into the last part, please. Thanks, Lorraine.
The final resource then is Social Work Resources, and the summary of their financial position at accounting period 4 is on page 177. Again, we're showing a break-even position at this point in time, and the budget for the year is shown in the greyed out box for the resource. The narrative explanations start on page 178 and run through to page 180 with the trend information sitting behind that. And again, if members have any particular questions, I'm happy to pick them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Are there any questions? There's no questions. Okay, can we agree the report, please? Thank you, Julia. Okay, item number 11, if there's urgent business, which there's no urgent business at the moment. So that concludes today's meeting. I would like to thank all members and officers for being here, and I can now formally close the meeting. Thank you.